speaker is Mark Blythe, who will be talking about anti-solutionist strategies.
Thanks very much. So in terms of the session title, being problem solving or not, I think I'm the or not element. And those of you who want HCI to be more scientific are not going to like this. So we heard a little bit about solutionism. I want to go a little bit deeper into this critique. It's been popularized by Eugenie Morozov, and he defines solutionism as solving problems that don't really exist, or suggesting quick technological fixes for complex social, political, or environmental problems. And his favorite example is BinCam. And this is a mobile phone in the lid of a trash can, and when it closes, it takes a picture of the contents and then sends that picture to Facebook so that your friends can see if you're recycling or not. And Morozov is deeply sarcastic about this invention and says, well done, guys, you've saved the world. But of course that's deeply unfair, and you know, the people that came up with BinCam never thought it was going to save the world. They thought it would be quite interesting, and it was quite interesting. But he's kind of got a point, hasn't he, Morozov, in this. And, you know, he levels the complaint not just to academic HCI, but, you know, at the products of Silicon Valley generally as well. And the term originates in city planning. He borrows the term from Dobbins, who situates it within practices of planning cities, and argues that it's very, very prevalent there because it's so tempting to dumb down the problem that you're trying to address, which is going to be so complex, in order to meet the solutions that you have. And he kind of traces it to the culture and practice of modernism in city design and planning. And maybe the most extreme example of that is Le Corbusier's plans for Paris. This is what Le Corbusier wanted to do to Paris. So thank God he was never allowed to do that. But there were a lot of people that thought that this was a good idea, and a lot of Le Corbusier's ideas made it from the page into the world. And how did this happen? It's very seductive often, Le Corbusier's vision. His writing is very seductive. The images that he produced were very seductive. The ideas were. And I just want to spend a little bit of time on this quote from a text he wrote called The Radiant City. And he talks about our fast car takes the special elevated motor track between the majestic skyscrapers as we approach nearer. And I just want you to notice there that, you know, we're in the car with him. It's me and him are in that car. There are no other cars on the road. So in these vast skyscrapers where presumably other people live and also have cars, they're not there. And this is a classic trope of advertising which is still with us today. If you watch an advertisement for a car now, the road is gloriously empty, isn't it? It's like they're selling the road more than they're selling the car. And we have this here, you know, at the turn of the century, this vision. It's very compelling, but it doesn't often work, and it ignores a lot of the complexity of how we actually live in cities. And much of that kind of approach, that top-down planning approach to city planning, has been more or less abandoned, except in visions of the smart city. So Adam Greenfield has written a very interesting book where he finds very strong echoes of this high modernism in visions of what the smart city is going to be like. And here we often have this central administrator who is, organizing an extremely efficient system which delivers goods and services to our door or wherever we happen to be. And again, you know, these images are very compelling. IBM is here. How clever is this advert? The medium is the message. Isn't that a smart advert? Smart ideas for smart cities? Another really clever advert. A bit too clever, maybe. And IBM, when they kind of get further into it, they said in 2009 that they wanted to create, they wanted to prevent crime before it happens, with smarter public safety for a smarter planet. And this is where we kind of you see this convergence between the design fictions that Hollywood presents us and the design fictions that we start to see within the community. And there's been a lot of interest in design fiction, over the past couple of years, and the idea of a diegetic prototype, a prototype which is part of a larger imagined fictional world. And this term comes from media studies, where it's used very critically against Hollywood. So the idea is that, we're being sold this idea in the diegetic prototype. So when, Tony Stark is spinning around the virtual holograms, it always works, He doesn't get the error message, like move your finger slightly further, we're being sold an idea here, right? And Dobbins warns us that sometimes the big idea can be so imageable, so fast, it becomes very compelling. It's very, very easy to get swept up in this way. And it's so easy to do this kind of stuff. I mean, I think this is a very beautiful image. This is a Constable painting where somebody's photoshopped in an architect's vision. How seductive and wonderful is that? Who could argue with it? It's wonderful, isn't it? But design fiction isn't always that way, and of course has its roots in Italian radical design, where we kind of see ideas like this. This is a vision of the future called the No-Stop City, by Branzi and colleagues in the 60s. And this was imagined in the city as, a kind of model where your home would also be your factory, would also be your office, and you move from one place to the other. And the images of it are these kind of bleak, grainy, black and white, kind of vaguely scary things. And of course, through Dunn and Raby and various other people, we have this long and very interesting tradition of critical design and speculative design and so on. And some of the most interesting work here is being done by Julian Bleecker and his colleagues, I think, in the Near Future Lab, where he produces these kinds of images for which take the form of advertisements for products and services that don't exist yet. So this is what do you do when you're in your driverless car and you're on your commute and you're bored? So what do? You play some sort of game where you're James Bond and you're kind of firing missiles at the road. It's a kind of very interesting, compelling idea, but are they serious? Do they really think this is a good idea? Or are they being critical? Or both? Or what? And it's interesting, but it kind of brings me to the point that David Foster Wallace, the novelist, was at in the late 90s, where he kind of became dissatisfied with irony and pointed out that irony had been the dominant discourse in American culture since about the 1960s. You just had 40 years of constantly undercutting authority and saying, we know this is all bullshit, right? But then there comes a point where that is ultimately enfeebling, and how do you get beyond that? How do you get past that was a problem. And so in this project, we were concerned, with, it was part of the My Place project, which was about imagining age-friendly cities, and we were keen to avoid both, solutionism and just irony. So we looked at, approaches like chindogu, which is the Japanese hobby of coming up with unuseless inventions. So this thing is not useless; it's useful. If you've got a runny nose, it provides, a useful thing for you. But it solves that problem and also creates other problems in that you've got to wear this toilet roll on your head. And it's not a critique of it. It's not a critique of tissues or runny noses. It's, it's just a kind of a way of looking at the space in an interesting way, I think. And we've used that kind of approach in different projects. So John Vines and colleagues add this notion of questionable concepts. So you might have an exploding handbag. So if somebody steals it, you can cover them in purple dye as they're running away. This is a project for banking for older people. And this thimble was something you would put on your finger, and it would remind you of your PIN. And these are not entirely serious ideas, and they were there to kind of open up a space. But they're not, they're not satires or anything either. And we kind of built on this approach with Kristina Andersen from STIME, who developed this workshop protocol, which she calls magic machines. So she starts from the premise from Arthur C. Clarke that any sufficiently advanced technology looks like magic. So she then would distribute low-fi materials like cardboard, plastic cups, string, whatever, and say, just make something and think with your hands. And people would be free to kind of come up with whatever crazy thing they liked, and then the question would be, okay, so what does it do? And part of the protocol is then that you have to present it. So we got the researchers on the My Place project, who were from a range of disciplines, to get together and try this. And the first part of the workshop is you had to write down an idea of your future self. What would your future self be? And then put that on a piece of paper in your back pocket. And then you would make a magic machine for that future self. So we kind of got to it. And this participant, who was wearing a fake beard to protect his anonymity, came up with the idea of a dog and cat poo detector, because he imagined himself as a lonely and embittered individual who might want to roam the streets finding dog and cat poo, and using this device to locate through some DNA database the address of the owner of the pet, so that he could then go and enact his revenge. Rachel Clarke, co-author of the paper, she came up with the idea of a listenator. And this would be a way of eavesdropping on local council meetings where they might be making decisions about what was happening. And, you know, part of Kristina's instruction was go out into the city and try it, which, you know, for me was kind of embarrassing. But, you know, it was kind of even more interesting when Rachel did it, because she went straight to the city council and set it up outside there. And one of the councillors, who was a partner on the project, walked past and went, "What you doing?" And we're like, "Oh, this is the listenator. We're going to listen in on your meetings." And it was like, huh. Okay. And it was kind of funny, but kind of uncomfortable as well in a very interesting way. So we decided to do this again with members of the Elders Council. And, you know, they were kind of hesitant at first and kind of like, oh, my God, I haven't done this since I was 4. But then they got into it. And, you know, one of them started talking about how the ideas started to flow. And the kind of ideas that they came up with were things like this. So this is the hacker's hat. And this participant was saying, this would tell you what was going on using something like some live feed surveillance type thing. Maybe there's some festival happening and you can join some spontaneous street party or something. But a rationale for it is very interesting. It was kind of like, well, you know, this is being used for evil purposes. Can we use this for good in some way and kind of repurpose it, you know? And similarly, I love this title. It's like... it's a title for a great novel or something. Technology-resistant nonagenarian scooter movement. And the idea for this was that, you know, it would be this infrastructure to help people in their 90s on scooters continue to protest and to be involved in activism and to go and protest that there weren't enough public loos and so on, you know. And... there was this one which was eyes and ears, and this is very interesting because this participant started talking about how frustrating it was to be called along as a representative of older people or whatever to council meetings and talk to, you know, people working on the council, and they'd be nodding and smiling and then completely ignore them. So, you know, they had a voice, but it kind of didn't matter. So it's like, oh, we can say this stuff, but it doesn't matter. Nothing happens, right? And so the idea for this was like, so, you know, maybe there's a kind of set of eyes and ears that we can give these people in the council so they can see the world as we see it and kind of walk a mile in our steps kind of thing. And we thought it was really interesting the way that this idea is expressed. The image of this idea, as much as the idea itself, okay? And just to kind of illustrate that, what we did was I made a kind of a Photoshop version of that same idea, but more like, you know, the critical design advertisement for product, you know, product or service that doesn't exist, and more of that kind of vibe of like, well, this is kind of scary, ain't it? You know? And it's very easy to do this. It's about as easy to do this as to kind of mock up the lo-fi thing. Increasingly easy to do this. But I think it's far less powerful in a way, this. And okay, it makes a point, but it only makes one point. It's kind of like, yes, we can imagine older people with these, you know, glasses on relaying information, but isn't it a little bit scary? Oh, surveillance society and so on. And it kind of just feels a bit, you know, of like enfeebled irony. And it forecloses the idea and shuts it down before you've even developed it. And to just kind of go back to that, this doesn't do that, I don't think. Certainly doesn't do it in that same way. And it's the same idea, really. So, going back to that idea of how do you image something, we're not saying that don't image things. Imaging things, creating representations is central to design. But when you kind of do it in this kind of way, it can be in some, maybe more limiting than doing something like this. And Bruno Latour has a famous quote where he says, being critical isn't just pulling the rug out from underneath somebody. It isn't just kind of, aha, you haven't thought of this, whatever. No, you say it's clearing a space for people to have ideas. Fragile and naive ideas, he called them, that had to be treated with care and caution. And I think, these things look like fragile, naive ideas that need to be treated with care and caution. And just to kind of finish up, I want to stress that, we're not saying here that these are kind of preparatory sketches for some future solutionist intervention. No, we're making a much bolder claim that these are in themselves useful to do in order to think about the space and the problems that you're trying to address. And in order to acknowledge the complexity of the problems you're looking at and the fragility of your own ideas and responses. And I'll leave it there and take questions and just thank my co-authors and the sponsors of the work. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for that. My name is Greg Walsh from the University of Baltimore. I do a lot of work with kids in participatory design, and so a lot of what I just saw was what we've been doing for years and years and years with kids.
Yeah.
It's not really a question, it's a statement that we find it super useful, extremely useful because that's how they can communicate with us, and that's their language. And when they do big headphones and crazy satellite dishes on their head, that's just them expressing what they're trying to do, and it's a very valuable tool for us to then translate that, into something for them.
Yeah.
So I have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, Kristina has run these kinds of workshops with children as well, and also finds it very useful, I think. So yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for your talk. I'm Joelle, Harvard Graduate School of Design. I don't know if it's a question or a comment. I wanted to see if you, and especially in regards to your introduction, and because we're at CHI and we're talking about HCI, and I feel like we're more and more in a rhetoric of, and I keep hearing that all the time, it's starting a project with how can we change the world, how we can make the world a better place, and all of a sudden you feel like there's almost an evangelistic approach of what we're doing, and almost like these things where we're waiting for the MIT to save the world. So I'm just wondering, how do you situate the kind of work you're doing as almost a way to challenge this idea of deterministic approach?
I think that what came out of the workshop really strongly was the idea that it's not necessarily the new technology that we need. It's more. There already is so much new technology, and we've got so much technology we don't know what to do with it. And for them, it was much more a question of appropriating the existing technology that we have to do something that they would want to do with it. And, it's kind of like Brandsey when he was talking about the no-stop city. He was very influenced by a remark that Engels made, which was that, you can't have like a working-class city. What you can have is a working-class critique of the existing city and try and kind of seize what's already there in that way. And that came through very strongly for those participants. So it wasn't just that we need new technologies. We need new ways of using those technologies with different kinds of orientations and values to them, so I think. I don't know if that answers your question, does it?
Yeah,
Maybe.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, thank you. I really enjoyed the talk. I'm curious if you see a link between solutionism and anthropocentrism. So particularly this idea that you can have these visions and sort of easily implement them in the world and make these futures happen. And if you think that's a fair comparison or if it's productive in any way.
Sorry, did you say anthropocentrism?
Yeah. Yeah,
what do you
world
mean?
is conceived by humans. So I'm thinking,
right.
Maybe contrasting the two versions.
Yeah, I hadn't thought that, but I guess maybe. Yeah, thank you. I'll have to think about that.
Hi, thanks, Mark.
Hi.
I think it's tremendously valuable to develop technology to solve problems in the world.
So do I.
And I think that the examples that you took are somewhat arbitrary, and I didn't see the full argument against problem-solving view here. And I think you're confusing failure, because it's normal to fail in achieving those solutions, right? In science and in design and so on. Right?
No,
So what you showed us on your argument,
Yeah.
as your argument, were basically series of failures, and that's normal in problem solving.
No, that isn't the argument. If that's what you took from the argument, I've misrepresented it, and it isn't my argument, I should say, as well. Morozov really developed the argument, and it comes from Dobbins originally. But it isn't that problem solving is a bad thing. That's clearly not. What the argument is that we don't understand the problems we're trying to address well enough before we jump in and try and solve them.
That
Right?
I can
So it's about
approve.
problem framing, in fact, and resisting the urge to very quickly go, well, here's something with impact. Here's something that I can get a CHI publication from. Here's my latest prototype. Here's something I can demand funding for. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of like, well, if we step back for a moment and consider the problem more, that's more time-consuming and that's harder, but that's kind of worthwhile too.
So you're basically not against problem solving, but against bad problem solving, right?
No, I don't. Well, let's talk more after.